The Ontario government tabled its second pandemic budget just over an hour ago. It's the biggest in provincial history. The $186 billion spending plan includes cash handouts for businesses and families and more money for healthcare to fight the pandemic. The deficit, meanwhile, is projected to dip slightly this year to $33 billion. The Ford government doesn't anticipate balancing the books until close to the end of this decade. Stan Cho is the parliamentary assistant to the Minister of Finance. He joins us now, along with Catherine Fife. She's the NDP's Finance and Treasury Board critic, and Mitzi Hunter is the Liberals' Finance and Treasury Board critic as well. Hello to all three of you. Great to see you. Thank you for making the time for us tonight. Appreciate it. Mr. Cho, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to pull out a quote from the opposition today. They're saying that your government missed the memo that the pandemic is not yet over. And I want to focus specifically on one area here, funding for school boards. It comes to an end. The pandemic-specific funding for school boards comes to an end in this budget. There's no more if the pandemic lasts longer than anticipated, which there seems to be some indicators that it could. Why is that?
Well, I want to make it very clear, Vashi, that base program funding to things like our world-class education system only go up. And that's been clearly demonstrated in the budget, that there is absolutely no cut. And I think it's a good thing that as we move through COVID-19, that, the funding for COVID-19 won't be necessary. So things like vaccination centers, needles in arms won't be a thing that we'll need once COVID-19 is behind us. But to be very clear, we're going to be there for Ontarians. There is absolutely no cut to education. There are only investments into healthcare and our valuable programs and services.
To be fair, Mr. Cho, though, how can you put a date on when the pandemic, quote unquote, will be over and those things are no longer necessary? And in the case of schools specifically, I mean, that extra funding was going to help class sizes be smaller, ventilation, things that are really, really necessary for the pandemic. And I would just point out that kids, we don't have a timetable for kids and when they're going to be vaccinated. So again, why curb that spending at this juncture? Why not wait until you know for sure?
So Vashi, you're absolutely right. I mean, one thing COVID-19 has shown us is that it is ever changing and that we are living through some very uncertain times. And that is why at the beginning of this pandemic, our original response was at 17 billion. Then later on in the summer, we increased that to 30 billion. And in our last budget, our support totaled 45 billion. And here in our sort of third phase of our response to COVID-19, we are at $51 billion with incredible prudence built into the system to be able to adapt quickly to an ever-changing environment. But again, very clear that we are only investing into those valuable programs and services that Ontarians are going to rely on more than ever once we are through this pandemic.
Ms. Fife, putting aside the question of schools, your party had indicated in advance of this budget that you were worried about cuts to other areas. It doesn't look like there's a lot of them. $1 billion for Ontario's ongoing vaccination campaign, $2.3 for an expanded COVID-19 testing and contact tracing, $1.8 billion for hospitals this year to help them care for COVID-19 patients. No sign of balancing the budget until close to the end of this decade. Isn't that kind of what you were looking for?
Well, I mean, I just want to say at the top, I mean, we were relieved that the government finally put some serious funding into vaccinations, and it shouldn't be partisan on the vaccination front. We are losing the race with the variants across the province, and hearing from businesses from across Ontario, they want to make sure that these investments happen quickly and that needles get into arms. And so, that's on that front, we have no complaint. Just to correct, though, Mr. Cho, year-over-year funding, Vashi, is $177.8 billion reduced to $173 billion. And so your education question is right on the mark. And this is one of our major concerns with this budget that was presented today, is that the government seems to think that we are out of this pandemic, and we are not. On the education front, there will be a reduction of $791 million. And let's please remember that pre-pandemic, education was already underfunded. And so the government can't take credit for the COVID top-up. We actually know that the federal government actually contributed almost 94% of that funding. So what we want to see this government do is make sure that people stay safe so the economy can stay open and so that we don't have to shut down again. This was the time, this was the budget to truly invest in keeping people safe across the province.
I guess my counter to that, though, Ms. Fife, would be this is one of the largest spending budgets ever. It's not like, I mean, even in the case of schools, it's not like the federal government right now is putting out there that there's going to be the second safe restart agreement. Everybody is kind of curbing down their expectations with the thought that the pandemic is coming to an end sooner rather than later?
Well, I think that the numbers are trending in the wrong direction, and I think that we have to be mindful of that. The third wave is not mentioned in this budget at all. And we know that the hospital top-up funding, which just happened on Monday, really just got them out of the red. We want to make sure that our hospitals have the resources that they need to keep people safe. We need to make sure that students make it through this last stage of this school year, Vashi, but are also well prepared for September. So the government is reducing funding before the pandemic is over, before we have some kind of reassurance that students will be okay in that fall session. And on the business front, because I was the economic development critic, the government has doubled down on poor policies. For instance, they have not changed the criteria for the small business grant. They are going to double up on those businesses that already received funding, but they're not going to increase the eligibility. And without businesses staying viable in the province of Ontario, that compromises our economic recovery.
Ms. Hunter, I'll pick up on that point. The criteria may be the same, and I take the point that there are complaints about that, but there is more money in this for small businesses. So, to characterize this as not addressing the needs of the pandemic, it's certainly not short in overall spending.
Is that for me or for Ms.
No, I'm sorry. That's for Ms. Hunter. I think her audio wasn't working. My apologies. Ms. Hunter, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, sorry. Do you mind starting from the beginning there? I'm so sorry. We had no audio for you.
Okay. So I was just saying, Vashi, that I agree with you that, this budget, to me, it lacks ambition. It does not necessarily recognize that we are in a generational crisis when it comes to COVID-19 and that we need a generational response. We need to see the fact that businesses need to recover and then grow. And so it doesn't go far enough when it comes to respond. It leaves many people behind and frankly abandons them. And that's the concern that we certainly see with the budget, is that it just missed the mark. It missed the opportunity. When you think of, for instance, childcare, we know that women have been disproportionately outsized affected by job losses, the sectors in which they work, and there's silence on women's economic recovery in this budget in terms of the specifics. Yes, there is a training program. You can register for a program and get $2,000 credit to do so. However, does that cover the need? And that's where we feel that it falls short. It just does not go far enough to address the concerns of many, many people. There are hundreds of thousands of small businesses in Ontario that are not being recognized in the small business grant. And so doubling it for existing businesses leaves a whole lot of people out of the support that they need to get back on their feet, especially when the government is depending on growth to balance the budget. So, the government is saying that the economy is going to grow. Well, without appropriate investments in programs and in spending, like in education, we're not going to see that happen.
Let me just pick up on that point. I'm unfortunately running out of time, but I have time for a quick comment from each of you. And Mr. Cho, just on the longer term projections, which do solely rely on economic growth in order to eventually, and to be fair, it's a few years out, many years out, but to eventually balance the books. Is it overly reliant on economic growth, A, and B, if that growth doesn't materialize, does that mean that, for example, cuts are on the table?
Well, thanks for that, Vashi. I know there's some people who say the path to balance and economic success only comes through austerity measures and cutting programs and services. There are others who say that only comes from increasing taxes on the people and small businesses of this province. But I think the Minister of Finance today made it very clear that that's a false choice, that there is indeed a third path, and that is by betting on the people of Ontario, creating the economic conditions for success that we saw before COVID-19, for manufacturing to thrive, for small businesses to create those jobs up and down Main Street. And we're confident in the people of Ontario. And that's why this budget has laid out the foundation for that success, not just with temporary measures to get us through this storm that is COVID-19, but with permanent reductions to doing business, creating that success, as well as supporting parents and women who we understand have been disproportionately affected by this pandemic. And this budget has outlined a series of measures that outlines that. That's why our spending is $187 billion. And those are investments into the core programs and services, but most importantly, into the people of this province. This budget is going to finish the fight we started over a year ago.
I just want to pick up on one point and put it to you. I wish I had time for many follow-ups, but to you, Ms. Fife, and that is around the plan for getting women back in the workforce. I know that your party, along with the Liberals, are criticizing the measures taken, such as a childcare grant that's not permanent. It's for this time. There's money for kids if you have them, and there's also that training program. What would be the kind of more structural thing that you'd suggest that the government could do to address the disproportionate ways that women are impacted by this? I should say they're also forming a task force on the issue.
Yeah, I mean, we actually have all the answers right now, and childcare is a major factor that has been missed in this budget. The care tax credit is only good if that childcare space exists. So the infrastructure investment has not happened under this government. The access to education for women as well is very problematic. The barriers are real to enter into the trades, for instance. And one of the major things that this government missed, Vashi, is that they have not adapted a paid sick day leave. If people are still going to work, first of all, you can't say you appreciate and you value workers in the province of Ontario if you don't allow them to stay home if they are ill. And never before in the history of this province have we better understood the connection of well-being and a healthy population to the economy. So essentially, this government is gambling with this budget, crossing their fingers and hoping it's all going to pan out. But if sick people are still going to work, we will still have transmission of COVID-19.
Ms. Hunter, just a quick final word to you. I'm so sorry I'm running out of time, but the federal government factors into this, according to the province here, in that they, first of all, we know that they are thinking about childcare for their own budget, and so that might impact the way in which it might roll out in Ontario, but also when it comes to the sick leave benefit. Does the province have a point there that they don't want to overlap with the feds?
I think the province is overly reliant on the federal government. It's the federal government's $763 million that went into ventilations and PPE for schools. And it's the federal government that has foot the bill for 92% of the pandemic responses. We can't continue to rely on that. Ontario is the economic engine of Canada, and we need to see an ambitious investment in programs like what we've proposed, an $8 billion investment in schools so that we can get Ontario on track for long-term economic growth rather than relying on federal government handouts.
Okay, I am out of time. I apologize, but I do appreciate all three of you making the time tonight. I'm sure we'll be talking about this for a long time coming. Thanks so much to Stan Cho, Catherine Fife, and Mitzi Hunter. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.